Starting anybody but Shedeur Sanders is dumb. Shedeur Sanders should be the starting quarterback in Cleveland.
Dan Orlovsky just said the quiet part out loud on national television. Not a hot take, not a hedge. He looked straight into the camera on Get Up and told the entire NSL world that starting anybody but Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland is flat out dumb. And he didn't stop there. He went after Deshaun Watson's health history. He went after the Browns' front office logic. And by the end of the segment, his co-host was scrambling to push back. This is the moment the Browns quarterback conversation stopped being polite. Here's exactly what Orlovsky said and why it's already splitting the room. Let's set the scene, because context matters here. This wasn't some random debate on a random Tuesday. This was Dan Orlovsky, a former NFL quarterback himself, someone who's paid to watch film and evaluate quarterback rooms for a living, sitting on Get Up and telling the audience straight up that the Browns have an obvious answer sitting right in front of them, and they might be too scared to take it. His exact words, starting anybody but Shedeur Sanders is dumb. Not, I lean that way. Not, it's worth considering. Dumb. That's the word he chose, on live television, about a real decision a real franchise has to make in the next few weeks. And then he went further. He brought up Deshaun Watson directly, and he didn't soften it. He pointed out that Watson has played 19 games in 6 years. 19 in 6 years. He brought up the shoulder surgery on the throwing arm. He brought up the Achilles surgery. He laid it out like a prosecutor building a case, not like a guy dancing around a sensitive topic. Then came the line that's going to get clipped 1,000 times this week. Orlovsky said the Browns need to figure out what they actually have. 2 years with Shedeur Sanders, 2 first-round picks next year already banked. At some point, he said, you have to look at the young player and see if he even has the potential to be your future. Read that again, because Orlovsky isn't just saying Shedeur deserves a shot. He's saying the entire long-term plan of this franchise, the stadium, the roster, the draft capital, all of it, hinges on answering one question. And you don't answer that question by keeping the guy who might be your future glued to the bench. This is a former NFL quarterback sitting in the ESPN chair telling Cleveland to their face that they're at risk of wasting a season they can't get back. And he said it before training camp even opened, before a single preseason snap. That's not a guy hedging his bets for the algorithm. That's a guy who watched the tape and made up his mind.
Starting anybody but Shedeur Sanders is dumb. Deshaun Watson, I understand, is there. He's played 19 games in 6 years. In that span, it's also shoulder surgery on his throwing arm and Achilles surgery. Figure out what you have, 2 of them with Shedeur Sanders. You have 2 first-round picks next year. At some point, you've got to look at that young player, see if he's even the potential of being your future. Because what are you going to do? Deshaun, and he plays well, and then you're going to pay him again?
Hold on, because Orlovsky wasn't the only voice in that segment. And what happened next is where it gets interesting. Tim Hasselbeck was sitting right there, and he didn't just nod along. He pushed back, hard. And on paper, his argument sounds reasonable. He said, look, Deshaun Watson isn't even 31 years old yet. He reminded everyone that Watson once threw for over 4,800 yards in a season, 33 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions. He said if you can get good quarterback play, you take it. Otherwise, you're starting Shedeur Sanders and presumably drafting another quarterback next year anyway. That's the counter. That's the case for patience, for veteran experience, for the guy who signed the historic contract in Cleveland, regardless of how injury-riddled the last few seasons have been. But here's what makes this segment so loaded. Hasselbeck also said something that, if you actually sit with it, agrees with Orlovsky more than it disagrees. He said Todd Monken is basically going to get somebody else ready for the future, meaning even the guy defending Watson is admitting the plan already includes preparing for a world after him. Then the host turned it back to Orlovsky, and this is where he drew the line in the sand for real. He said early in the offseason, Deshaun Watson looked like the favorite. Looked like, past tense. But his understanding, and remember, these guys talk to people inside these buildings, is that Shedeur had a really good finish to the offseason program. Good enough that it's now, in Orlovsky's words, an actual competition heading into training camp. Then he said the part that should get anyone's attention who wanted this to be a settled decision already. Todd Monken has waited a long time to become a head coach. He is not walking into year 1 and saying we're throwing in the towel and developing a rookie.
If Deshaun Watson gives him the best chance to win games right now, Orlovsky admitted, Monken will probably play him. But then, immediately, the turn. To Dan's point, Hasselbeck said, that's not the right call for the future of the franchise. Sit with that for a second. Two ESPN analysts, on air, essentially agreeing that the coach might make the decision that's best for this season, while both of them believe it's the wrong decision for the franchise long term. That is not a small disagreement. That's the entire Cleveland Browns quarterback situation compressed in 90 seconds of live television.
I don't agree with it. Look, Deshaun Watson, what Dan said about, his history is right, but he's not even 31 years old. And this is a guy that threw for over 4,800 yards in a season, threw 33 touchdowns and 7 picks that year. Like, if you can get good quarterback play, you need to get it. Otherwise, you're starting Shedeur Sanders. You're presumably drafting a quarterback next year, to take over. So basically, Todd Monken is saying, look, I'm just going to get somebody else ready for the next head coach of the Cleveland Browns. I think if you can get good quarterback play, you get it. So it might be Shedeur, but if it's Deshaun Watson, and it very may well be.
So which is it? Is Cleveland playing for this year, or are they finally ready to play for the future? Orlovsky didn't leave much room for doubt about which one he thinks they should choose. Here's where the segment stops being a debate and starts sounding like a warning. The host asked point blank, what would Deshaun Watson have to do to convince the Browns to re-sign him after this year? And Orlovsky's answer wasn't a number. It wasn't a stat line. He said, basically, inconceivable. 17-0, win the Super Bowl. Then we can talk about it. That's not a guy leaving the door open. That's a guy telling you the door is basically shut, and the only way it reopens is a miracle season that almost never happens in this league. He followed it up by repeating the core of his entire argument. They need to find out what they have in Shedeur Sanders, and he said he thinks at some point this season they will find out. But then he added the caveat that's been quietly sitting under this entire story. You have a new coach. A new coach wants to win games in year one. If Deshaun Watson is healthy and he's out playing Shedeur in camp, that's the direction Monken goes. So here's the tension Orlovsky's putting on the table in real time. He believes the smart, big-picture decision is obvious. Start Shedeur, find out what you have, protect the 2 first-round picks and the years you've already invested. But he also knows, because he's been in these buildings, that coaches under pressure to win now don't always make the big-picture decision. They make the decision that keeps them employed in December. Then he pivoted to something almost nobody was talking about. He said Cleveland doesn't matter right now in the NFL and hasn't for years. He brought up the new stadium they're building, and he made the connection everyone in that building should already understand. When you build a new stadium, it doesn't matter how good your roster is around the edges, unless you have a young quarterback fans can actually get excited about for the next decade. Playing Deshaun Watson, in Orlovsky's exact words, does nothing for that future. Literally nothing. That's the sentence that turns this from a quarterback debate into a franchise identity debate. This isn't just about who wins more games in September, it's about whether the Browns are building something people actually want to watch for the next 10 years, or whether they're running it back with a plan that's already produced 19 starts in 6 seasons.
The Browns to re-sign him after this year.
Yeah.
Like, inconceivable. 17-0 in the Super Bowl, and then we can talk about it. So they need to find out what they have in Shedeur Sanders. I think at some point this season they will, but yeah, you have a new coach there who's going to want to win games. If Deshaun Watson is healthy and outplaying Shedeur in training camp, that's the way they're going to go.
Cleveland doesn't matter right now in the NFL, and they haven't for years. They're building a new stadium. When you build new stadiums, unless you have a young quarterback, it doesn't matter how good your football team is. Playing Deshaun does nothing for your future. Literally nothing.
100%
It is only
agree.
about.
And then Orlovsky said the one line that's going to define how people remember this segment. If the Cleveland Browns make the quarterback decision strictly based on what gives Todd Monken his best shot to win games in his first year as a head coach, Orlovsky said, that's a mistake. Not a risk, not a gamble, a mistake. Said flat out, live, about a decision this franchise hasn't even made yet. Think about what he's actually arguing here, because it's bigger than one quarterback battle. He's saying that first-year head coaches have a built-in bias. They're desperate to prove they belong, desperate to win now, and that bias can push them toward decisions that feel good in October and cost the franchise years down the line. He's not attacking Todd Monken's character, he's pointing out a pattern that's played out across this league for decades. Win-now pressure and long-term roster building are constantly at war with each other, and the coach on the hot seat almost always leans toward now. That's why this Orlovsky take landed the way it did. It's not just a Shedeur Sanders take. It's a warning about how organizations can sabotage their own future by optimizing for the wrong season. And here's the part that should stick with you. Orlovsky isn't guessing about Shedeur's trajectory in a vacuum. He's not just a guy who likes the highlight reel. He watched a full off-season program. He clearly has sources inside that building feeding him information. And his read is that Shedeur had a genuinely strong finish, strong enough that this is now a real live training camp competition and not a formality. So, you've got a former NFL quarterback with real evaluation credibility telling you the long-term math says Shedeur, telling you a first-year head coach's incentives might push toward Watson anyway, and telling you flat out that if that happens, it's a mistake the Browns will regret. That's not a hot take built for engagement. That's a guy laying out exactly how this could go wrong in real time before it's even happened. Training camp is going to answer this. Not takes, not debates, actual reps against actual competition. But Orlovsky just made sure that whatever Todd Monken decides, everyone watching already knows what the stakes are and who's going to get blamed if this goes the wrong way.
Maybe in November.
But if you're the new head coach,
I get that world.
Yeah.
I get that world. But if the Cleveland Browns make the quarterback decision strictly on Todd Monken as the head coach, and this is his first chance doing it in that window, that's a mistake.
Okay, let's move on from that one. I like it.
No fabricated firing here, no fake contract, no invented quote. Just a former NFL quarterback on national television saying the quiet part loud. Let's recap exactly what happened, because it matters that this all actually happened on air, and none of it needs to be dressed up. Dan Orlovsky said starting anybody but Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland is dumb. He backed it up by pointing to Deshaun Watson's health history, 19 games in 6 years, shoulder surgery, Achilles surgery. He said the Browns need to find out what they have in Shedeur, especially with 2 first-round picks already committed to this era. Tim Hasselbeck pushed back, defending Watson's ceiling when healthy, but even he admitted the franchise is quietly preparing for life after Watson regardless. Orlovsky then revealed that Shedeur had a strong finish to the offseason program, strong enough that this is a genuine training camp competition. But he also admitted Todd Monken, a first-year head coach hungry to win, might start Watson if Watson is healthy and outplaying Shedeur. And then came the warning. If Cleveland makes this decision strictly based on what wins the most games in year one, Orlovsky called it a mistake, because a new stadium, a rebuilding fan base, and a franchise that hasn't mattered in years needs a young quarterback to build around, not another short-term bridge. That's the whole story. No rumors needed, no inventions needed, just a former NFL quarterback drawing a hard line on live TV about a decision that's about to define the next decade of Cleveland Browns football. So now it's on Todd Monken. Does he listen to the guy who's telling him the long-term math says Shedeur Sanders, or does he chase the short-term math that keeps a first-year head coach employed through December? Dan Orlovsky already told you what he thinks happens if Monken picks wrong. A mistake. His word, not ours. Training camp starts soon, and every single rep is about to get broken down like it's the Super Bowl, because for once, the stakes are actually that real. Here's the question for the comments. Do you think Todd Monken makes the smart long-term call and starts Shedeur Sanders, or does he play it safe with Deshaun Watson to try to win now? Drop your answer below. Smash like and subscribe.